by building it in the process, and just a very revealing metaphor. That the angel of progress was improving human life. After Stalinism, after the Holocaust, after countless disasters of the 20th century, it's very difficult to have that blind faith anymore and say, all we need to do is become rational, abandon religion, become educated. None of this seems to have made our world the kind of happy place that some of the classic free thinkers anticipate. So for me, the starting question in working on this book was, how come we're so few? How come we're so few? And how do we make sense? How do we make sense? Are we still Enlightenment people? Do we still believe in reason? Do we still believe in science? And if we do that, how do we cope with the disasters that reason and science seem to have brought? How do we tie things together? Those were my starting questions, actually. A bunch of other questions are absolutely essential, especially to your question of making sense of things. Because what is it we want to make sense of? Well, there are a few questions. Immanuel Kant asked them, one philosopher who asked a number of absolutely essential questions. What kind of beings are we? Another question, what can I know? What should I do? What may I hope? Question of knowledge. Now imagine the sense, and I don't have to convey this to all of you because you've gone through parts of this, or maybe even all of the steps here, of disconnecting or without God, without a supreme force. What can we know? How do we understand personal responsibility? How do we understand what we are and what we should do? Why, I'll ask a related question about knowledge, to come back to, why is it that some people choose to know what there is to know in the world, and some people choose to be ignorant? That's a puzzling question. And particularly coming off of the American election experience with Sarah Palin, this sort of amazing fact that one of the two major political parties in our country could nominate someone who would sort of take pleasure in not knowing, and who would appeal to people who aggressively don't know and don't want to know. You know, the latest yesterday was about that. It turns out they discovered she didn't know that Africa was a continent, and she didn't know that South Africa was a country. These are just some specific, but there is that in our culture in the United States. Creationism, of course, is the finest example. People choosing, I want to say choosing here, to not know. But also, there's another important knowledge question. What are the important things to know today? Anybody who wants to make sense of the world faces it's almost overwhelming, because the number of things to know multiplies by the minute, and the question of how you know them, and what kind of, for educators, what kind of education can help people to know. These are absolutely essential questions. What are our moral obligations? Another kind of question. And I'm restating Kant's questions here, obviously. But in addition to restating Kant's questions, a secularist question that I think many of us have faced: how do those of us who don't believe in God and therefore don't plan to be around forever, either to be punished or be praised, how do we face life ending? A finite life. How do we face death and dying? Is there, I'll ask another question which to me is one of the essential ones. Is there a meaning of life that human beings might actually be able to talk about, think about, and agree upon without God? Is there a meaning of human history? Now, the questions I'm asking, and I can go on in a few minutes, I will. The questions I'm asking are, what should we say? They are post-Holocaust questions, post-Stalinist questions, post-20th century questions, post-Enlightenment questions. I don't want to yet say post-modern questions, because I think they're the same essential modern questions that people always ask or thought they had the answers to. And what I'm getting at by posing these questions is I'm trying to say we need, in addition to the very aggressive writings about religion that have stimulated people so much in the past 3 or 4 years, we need an equal number of writings that ask questions about the kinds of questions I'm posing, which, I want to put it this way, are 21st questions for secularists, 21st century questions for secularists. I'm saying after the collapse of the illusion of progress or the belief in progress, after the 20th century, after the feeling that Enlightenment hopes have faded, we need to rethink. We need to rethink these fundamental questions and come up with adequate, satisfying answers. So, what I've tried to do in my book is to make one such effort, with the understanding that I will make it as fiercely and forcefully as I can, and that I'm willing to submit it to argument and discussion, and that the best result of my book would be if 4 other people wrote books differing from mine, and we engaged in some very serious discussion on all these questions. So, I'm asking, what is it to live without God in the 21st century, given the fading of Enlightenment hopes? Now notice, I say fading of Enlightenment hopes. I don't say fading of the Enlightenment because all the tools we use to answer all the important questions of life are still Enlightenment tools. Reason, science, human understanding. Now, my starting point in terms of answering these questions, so I've given you I sort of started with some of your questions and expanded upon them and expounded upon those questions. And as I try to answer those questions, I begin, anybody see that article in the Toronto Star a couple of years ago? It was called, "Thank Who Very Much?" with a question mark. And it was an excerpt from my chapter on gratitude. Why gratitude? Gratitude turns out to be one of the most significant religious attitudes. For example, if you're out hiking and you come down a hill on a warm spring day and you feel the sun on your face and you hear the birds chirping and you see a small lake in front of you, it's very possible to stop, pause, feel the warmth of the sun, and feel something that isn't just pleasure, but is almost emotional. Gratitude. Now, if you're a believer in God, you know where that goes. And it's very powerful